Okay, this week I need to know what John Wayne, a bat cave, a 35,000 square foot laundromat, and General Patton have in common. I think I've got a lot of explaining to do. This week we are at Fort Clark Springs, right across from Brackettville, Texas. And wow, what an amazing experience. We selected Fort Clark Springs using our little RV app, and the whole point of selecting it was a midway point on our way to Big Bend, which is our target on this first quarter of this year's trip. So here we are in Fort Clark Springs. We had absolutely no idea what to expect here. I wasn't sure if this place was a cult compound. I wasn't sure if it was an old military base. I wasn't sure if it was a town. I was a little mixed reading reviews. I kind of couldn't figure it out. Fort Clark Springs is an unincorporated community that is made up from the previous military base of Fort Clark. Decommissioned in 1946 and sold to a local rancher. The military had taken down many of the buildings, and many of the buildings still remain. The rancher eventually sold several of the buildings and all of the area to a community. And wow, it's got a neat historical element, and they're restoring a lot of the historical parts right now. So we really had no idea what this place was at all. Once we've got parked, and we started seeing, wow, there is a ton of military stuff here, but it's kind of confusing because the fort was built in the mid-1800s, but the last time it was a base and the most expansive base was during World War II. So there are a lot of concrete pads, a lot of roads and concrete areas that are all grown up, with vegetation and stuff around them, but you could tell something was there. And there's a lot of really neat foundations. One of the best parts about this park is they have little signs up everywhere telling you what a lot of the foundations were or what was previously in that area. So as you go on walks or drives, you see these signs, and we have to keep stopping the car and getting out because it's so interesting. No idea this was even here. This is where the 35,000 square foot laundry facility comes into play. This is a real thing. Check this out. It was enormous. All that's left is the foundation and, of course, this giant chimney here. Fort Clark was the military base here, and it is in the National Registry of Historic Places. This week's nerd segment, we're going to get into Fort Clark. We're going to get big into Fort Clark. I'm going to dumb it down as much as I can. It was loaded with so much history. I was a little bit overwhelmed. So I'm going to try to hit the high points, make it interesting for you, and make it someplace you might want to come check out. Fort Clark was established in 1852, right on the Los Morris Springs at the headwaters of the springs. Fort Clark was home of the 2nd Mounted Texas Rifles. A lot of people don't realize that Texas was actually completely independent before it became part of the United States for a few years there. It had separated from Mexico. Actually, it was the Mexicans came up and created their own, really their own little country. And the point was to escape that area. So Texas actually, for about 10 years, was kind of its own place. Then it became part of the United States of America. And this was all right prior to the Civil War. Later in the war, it served as a depot for military supplies and as a military hospital. In 1872, the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts came here after 20 years of protecting along the Mexican border. That time, they became scouts for the Army. They were known for their skills in fighting and for scouting this area and were very familiar with the territory. Now, I was a little confused on the difference between the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts and the Buffalo Soldiers. At various times, the Buffalo Soldiers were also stationed here at Fort Clark. The Buffalo Soldiers, of course, were an actual Army division that started in 1866, made up of African American. The Seminole Negro Indians were actually descendants of the Seminole tribe and had been scouts along the Mexican border for years. Both the Seminole Negro Indians and the Buffalo Soldiers played a critical role in the Indian Wars here in Texas. The Indian Wars happened in the late 1800s following the Civil War here in Texas, when the Mexicans had recruited the Lipan Indians and the Kickapoo Indians to help with their cause of taking back over some of the southern Texas area. The Indian tribes knew the Americans had no interest in them and had interest in their territory, so they had created an alliance with Mexico. The Seminole Negro Indian Scouts that were based at Fort Clark crossed the Rio Grande River, ended the hostilities from both the Kickapoo and the Lipan tribes, essentially ending the Indian Wars in this area, and all of the Mexican hostility had ended at that point. Following the Indian Wars, Fort Clark faced closure. However, the Spanish-American War broke out, so the fort still had some usefulness as far as training soldiers. The fort again faced closure in the early 1900s, but the Mexican Revolution caused the fort to stay open because of the uncertainty in Mexico. Following that, World War I broke out, and Fort Clark was a cavalry fort. So there's a bunch of neat history if you're into horses as well here. The largest growth of the area that the fort faced was when World War II broke out. In 1941, the 112th Cavalry was assigned to this fort, as was the National Guard. Later, 12,000 troops from the 2nd Cavalry were assigned to Fort Clark. For my gearhead grease monkey family members, here is what they call a grease rack, and of course the motor pool from WW2. And this is where General Patton fits in. General Patton was the commanding officer of this facility. At the time, he was Colonel Patton from 1936 to 1938. General Wainwright was also stationed here in the early 1900s when he was a cavalry soldier. General Wainwright, of course, was the commanding officer in the Philippines at the time that the Japanese surrendered in World War II. He was stationed here at Fort Clark from 1906 to 1908. During World War II, Fort Clark also housed a German POW camp. Fort Clark was one of the last cavalry posts in the country, and in 1946 the fort was closed as cavalry had become fully mechanized and recognized as fully mechanized by the U.S. government and had no need for horses anymore. And so the forts, the last couple of cavalry forts that involved horses, Fort Clark was one of those, and that is why it closed in 1946. I I could walk around all day long just reading the signs, which Texas does a beautiful job of putting historic signs on buildings and things like that. And several of these buildings are just beautiful, as are the parade grounds. The airport, or what they call the airport, is still in the back part of the fort, and the motor pool, things like that. It's so neat. Okay, so how do the bats come into play? Good question. So about a half an hour from Fort Clark Springs is the Kickapoo Caverns State Park. The Kickapoo Caverns has a bat cave that is home to over 1 million, that's right, 1 million long-tailed Mexican bats that come out every night as the sun goes down. We decided we're going to go see the bats. We are here waiting to see the bats. There are going to be bats here in a minute. So the night we went to see the bats, to our surprise, the temperatures had dropped from around 100 into the mid-50s and were extremely windy. By the time we got done sitting up there waiting for the bats, it was in the high 40s, and we were about frozen. Turns out when it's real windy or real cold, the bats don't come out. So we saw about 6 bats. So kind of a bust on that one. It may have been more than 6, but it was a far cry from 1 million, I promise you. See what Lilo was up to this week. She loved it here in Texas, but it was pretty hot a lot of the time, that's for sure. Lots of places for her to walk, though. We did a ton of walking this trip. Brackettville, Texas is actually right across the street from Fort Clark Springs, and it's a tiny little town, an old western town. A lot of it is closed down. Has a very tiny main street, but has a beautiful city hall type of building, courthouse, and I'll show you a little picture of that there. Had an amazingly pleasant surprise when we went to a place called the Pizza Outpost. It's for sale. It's next to a old car wash that's closed and also looks for sale, and a drive-through liquor barn, which is a whole interesting thing. This is a thing in Texas. You actually drive through and get your snacks and your beers or whatever you want. It's almost like driving through a convenience store, which is right next door. We thought the Pizza Outpost was closed. We go in, and it's wonderful. Here at Fort Clark Springs, they have one of the greatest museums I've ever seen. It's a small structure. It has an incredible amount of actual artifacts and pictures. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. They ask for a $2 donation, and it is fantastic. They even had an old record player from the early 1900s that cranked up, and they made sure to wind it up and play it for me, an actual one, and everything was just collections of amazing stuff, like irons, things like that. It was fantastic. Just a beautiful museum. Definitely worth a stop if you're ever in the South Texas area. Totally cool place. They also have a wonderful little store right next to the museum. And it's pretty great because it has the post to tie the horses to out front, so it looks a little more like it would have in the late 1800s. Really neat thing. Across from it is the walls where all the original stables were, and in World War II they added many, many more stables because there were, in a cavalry unit with 12,000 soldiers, there were thousands of horses here as well. Where does John Wayne fit in? The John Wayne movie, The Alamo, was filmed at a ranch in Brackettville, Texas. They actually rebuilt the Alamo for the movie. Many of the interior scenes were filmed here at Fort Clark. There was actually a fire in one of the buildings here at Fort Clark during the filming. Some of the film was destroyed and they had to reshoot some of the scenes. The fire crews were actually a lot of the film crew was putting out the fires, including actors. It was apparently a whole scene. And as the fire got going, a whole bunch of rattlesnakes apparently came slithering out from underneath the structure. So then they had to turn the water hoses on the rattlesnakes and tried to put the fire out. So it was a whole thing. But that's where John Wayne fits into the whole story. He was filming the Alamo here at Fort Clark Springs. The RV park here at Fort Clark Springs is a beautiful park, very flat, very level. All of the sites have full hookups. Very wonderful walking area. The staff was super friendly and super helpful. Just a great little RV spot. I would not mind spending a lot more time here. I walked down a trail to what they call the Red Bridge. It's quite a long hike to get to the Red Bridge, and that was originally where the Indians had discovered the Las Maras Creek in the 1700s, maybe even late 1600s. And here are a few pictures of the drought. There are also white spotted deer, which originated in India. I can't remember the exact type of deer that they are, but they are everywhere here. And they are beautiful critters, but there are a bunch of them. And just because they have spots doesn't mean they're babies. They all have spots, every one of them. There are normal deer that we're accustomed to the area also, but the white spotted deer are everywhere. Fort Clark Springs was such a wonderful place. What a nice surprise. We enjoyed it so much. Can't wait to come back. Stay tuned for our next travel episode where we go to Big Bend National Park. And thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. Okay, I have a tiny piece of bonus footage here. Check out this little fella.